So good afternoon and happy National Mentoring Month. My name is Carolyn Alessi. I'm Regional Director of Community Health and Wellbeing and the Curtis C. Robinson Center for Health Equity at Trinity Health in New England. I also have the privilege to serve as state leader for Million Women Mentors Connecticut chapter. I would like to thank our national chapter, Million Women Mentors, for co-hosting this webinar with us. Million Women Mentors is the premier network dedicated to encouraging women and girls across the globe to pursue, persist, and succeed in STEM careers. Today, women make up 52% of the college-educated workforce, but only 29% of STEM workforce. 50% of women drop out of their fields within the first 12 years. Our Mentoring Up Advisory Group is made up of leaders dedicated to supporting the advancement of women into C-suite roles and board positions. This topic of our webinar today came from an experience that both Ron and I shared. One of my colleagues became my boss, and she kept giving me feedback that I moved too fast. I was concerned that if I didn't figure out how to make her comfortable with my decision-making process, it could be a career killer for me. I hope this resonates with many of you. These webinars strive to bring relevant topics to help you navigate your career progression. With that, I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Ron Utterbeck. Ron is Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Eversource. In his current position, he oversees information technology across all areas of the company, including cybersecurity, system resiliency, technology planning, process optimization, and ensuring full regulatory compliance of IT systems. Before joining Eversource, Ron served as Senior Vice President of Enterprise Architecture and Emerging Technologies at the Hartford. In his role, he evaluated emerging technologies and was accountable for ensuring that enterprise-wide architecture leveraged the proper technology to achieve the Hartford's business strategies. In his prior career at General Electric, Ron served as CIO and as Director of Michigan Technology Center. His experience includes a decade serving as CIO and Chief Technology Officer for several of GE's lines of business in the US and China. He is an active committee member of the Mentoring Up Advisory Group at Million Women Mentors Connecticut chapter and serves on the Central Connecticut State University Industry Advisory Board, the Bushnell Board of Trustees, and on the Ready CT Board of Directors. Ron earned a Bachelor's of Science degree in Computer Science at the Ohio State University and he's also a really terrific guy. So I'm looking forward to seeing him moderate. With that, I will invite Ron to moderate this afternoon and introduce our panel.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining. Carolyn, thanks for the gracious introduction. I'm going to jump on into it. So Carolyn gave you the genesis of how this idea came up, and we had a great discussion that day, and it really stimulated, like, maybe there's more lessons learned that we can talk through. And throughout our careers, we have certain changes that are step growth opportunities. By step growth opportunities, I mean they require us to gain or refine different skill sets than those that we leverage to get us to that point in our career. I like to call those inflection points. Let me give you a couple examples. Your first leadership role, moving from an individual contributor to a leader. Some others are, you got a role that requires you to lead through others. You get a new manager, as Carolyn talked about. You're a new team leader, or some of the other side of this is you're leaving a team. You might have not had a stellar review or a bad review, a failed project or initiative. And those are just a couple ideas of times in your career when there's a step growth opportunity. It typically causes you to leverage a different skill set than what you're used to. Today, we have three outstanding leaders who have had very different career journeys. They've all managed and navigated inflection points in their career, and we're lucky to have them sharing advice and lessons that they've learned along the way. Sue Cadeau joins us from Eversource, Torod Neptune from Medtronic, and Hope Utterbeck from Liberty Bank. Hopefully you've had the opportunity to read their impressive bios when you signed up when you registered for this event. So to get us started, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give us a brief introduction of their career journey. And Sue, do you mind going first?
No, good afternoon, everybody. I'll start off by the way I always do is I feel like I've grown up in IT. I started my career as a help desk individual, learning the ropes of service desk and service delivery, really put me in front of the customers and understanding the impact that we have on our customers day to day. From there, I became a project manager at the same company, and then a program manager at the same company. The company is WebMD. I'm sure you've all heard it. Worked there for about 7 years, and from there I moved on and still became a product or project manager or program manager, and then really dove into technology from there, being a data center manager, a director of shared services, a director of global delivery at Accudyne, and as of recent, here at Eversource, the director of infrastructure, technical services, enterprise architecture, as well as application areas. So really a trajectory, but 30 years in the making, and a long path to get to where I'm at, but always in infrastructure and love technology as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you. Torod, do you mind going next?
Sure. Again, I'm Gerard. Great to be with you all. I'll describe my career through the trajectory of half of it was spent on the consulting side of things. So in the large global consulting firms, again, given where I sit today, predominantly on the marketing, brand, crisis, communications continuum. And then for the last half, that was spent in-house with big brands as well. Again, similar roles. Generally supporting CEOs, driving organizational transformation, and sitting atop what I often describe as that business and society contextual platform for big organizations.
Thank you. Hope.
Hi, I'm Hope Utterbeck, and I, along with Sue, grew up in IT. So with a plethora of experience going on about 30 years as well when it comes to starting my career with GE. So I was with GE for about 25 years and progressed my career starting as a individual contributor coder. I coded in COBOL and GCL and all sorts of old technology that not many people use anymore. But it was a great experience for me to understand the business, figure out how our applications work, processes, and then obviously eventually just continuing gradually getting more and more responsibility throughout my career. I'm going from mainframe eventually to e-commerce. So, doing web development along with being able to lead the team to be able to put their first B2B websites together and just continuing to progress and learning more and more about all the different technologies that are out there. Eventually went to GE Corporate, where I learned about enterprise applications, wide applications that go across the entire company. So bigger, better, stronger types of apps, but also bigger and better responsibility when it comes to me kind of progressing in my career. And then eventually becoming a regional CIO for our sourcing applications. And then I went to GE Capital to kind of learn about the banking industry. One of the things about GE that is really sought out is that I don't have to leave the company to learn about new industries. And so I was able to learn 3 different industries by staying with the same company and ending my career there at GE Capital. And as they ended up changing directions when it comes to where they went, I decided to go to a smaller bank, going to Webster Bank and taking care of all of their applications in that space, and learned a tremendous amount. And when it comes to how it's different when it comes to a bigger company going to a smaller company, and along with a diverse set of applications when it comes to what ran the bank. And then I got the opportunity here to come and run my own shop when it comes to being CIO for Liberty. I'm super excited on being here. I've been here for about 2 years. And learning a tremendous amount from a leadership perspective, but also probably even more so from a business perspective when it comes to what makes the company tick and what levers do we need to pull and how technology is going to continue to help grow the company and meet its goals. So, but thank you for inviting me here. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, thank you all. We're excited to have you. I'm going to start with a few questions, but before I do that, I just want to make a feature available to everybody. If you look on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see 2 clicks over from the right. There's a question and answer button that you can press. Feel free, if we go through here, to put in some Q&A, so many questions that you're interested in, and we will try our best to get to those as we progress. So the first question, and just to kind of get it started, and I'd love to hear all of your everyone's words on this, words of wisdom on this, is what advice do you offer people when they're starting their first leadership role? So this is someone going from an individual contributor, probably a very successful individual contributor, and now they're going to be leading a team. Sue, do you mind kicking that off?
No, not at all. So, I think the biggest jump you make moving from an individual contributor to a leader is really about managing people. Managing people is the biggest shift, right? And initially you're responsible for yourself and your deliverables, and now you're responsible for a team and the team's deliverables. And I think it's really important that as individual contributors move into those management roles, they really understand that, because it is definitely a shift in responsibility. Understanding not only that they will be responsible for an area or for actions within the new role, but their desire to lead people. I don't think everybody in my career, I have demoted managers because I feel like they were great at their individual contributor, but managing people was not something that they were that were good at. So, being an individual contributor and being a leader or a manager is definitely different. You need to focus on leading, managing, coaching, and also delivering your top priorities as a leader. About a year and a half ago, I promoted an individual contributor here at Eversource, and she was very well respected and well received, but very soft-spoken. And when we promote within Eversource, we collaborate as a leadership organization on making sure we're promoting the right people. And, I'll say that there wasn't a lot of backing to promote this individual because she was so soft-spoken. And a year and a half later, her being in this manager's role, she got high contributor as being a manager. And she's learned to manage people. But when I did her 6-month review with her, I asked her, tell me what you've learned most about being a leader and a manager, and what was the most challenging. And her comment back to me was, I didn't realize managing people would be so difficult. And that she goes, I've had to take a lot of courses and really understand how to manage the different personalities and characteristics, and managing people to their full potential and understanding their full potential. And that was enlightening to me as she said that to me, because I didn't realize that when you move somebody there, it was probably one of the first times I'm like, wow, you're right. Managing people is difficult. So I would say, just if I'm to coach a new manager, it's really making sure they understand that's the biggest part of their transition, is really leading people.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. So you're spot on, right? I think it's the hardest transition for many people to go through when it comes to you being just accountable for yourself to now you're being accountable for a team of people, right? And you owning that accountability. And that's a hard transition for people. And I think the other hard part is they really thrive on delivering something and being being that one person that can actually, you kind of have your own destiny in your own hands, right? And being able to deliver it, and people get a thrill out of it, and it's why they come to work every day. And then they do less of that when they're leading people, right? So now they're delegating, and they have to learn how to get and influence people on how they're actually going to be able to get them to now deliver and get them to be accountable and get them to be as good as they were as an individual contributor. And that's hard. People miss it after a while, right? They miss being that person to do the execution piece. So I think people just need to go in with their eyes open, knowing that that is different, right? When it comes to how hard it is. And I like what you said about how hard it is to lead people. I was actually mentoring someone last week, and we talked about how he has aspirations of becoming a leader. And I talked to him to say, I wish they had a psychology course before you become a leader. Because you need to understand all of the different types of personalities that you're going to interact with and influence, right? What makes them tick and what makes them actually get motivated. And so sometimes there's a psychology around that when it comes to really understanding it. So I support a lot of the things you said. I think you're spot on.
I'd add just two really practical things in addition to what Hope and Sue just shared. I think for me, I was fairly focused before I was a people manager on picking leaders who I respected, who I thought were great models of leaders, managers. And so both to emulate what I'd seen, but also, I was strategic about picking a couple of those leaders who I respected for the way they showed up and really asking them to help mentor me in those early years as a people manager. Because again, in some ways, I think that was the easiest roadmap for me to really engage with people who were great models, so that I just wasn't out doing it on my own. And so having the benefit of being very strategic about those two, I think really helped me at the outset.
Thank you. Two things. I love the looking for others and bringing in other mentors on in there, because your role has changed. And sometimes it's really important for us to think about, okay, now that my role's changed, do my mentors need to change? Right. And being very purposeful about that. And then the other thing that went across all three of them was this influencing, right? And I always think about when you're leading a team, I can reach out and I can touch and I can influence my team members. Torod, I'd love for you to kind of kick us off with talking about, a few years, you've been doing that for a couple of years, and now you start to lead a team of teams. So you don't necessarily have that same access and availability to all the team members. How does that change your approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, I think about it as two things. And so I've had the luxury for the latter part of my career of being able to help build teams, particularly when I was a leader of leaders. And so I've always been cognizant of keeping people who are smart, in some ways smarter than I am, close to me. And so I think there's some of that confidence in a leader that, the team you have around you is the right team to help you be able to lead and show up in that way. And so I think that's one consideration. But I think also back to the first question, really thinking through the type of leader that I want to be, and the influence that that decision has on how I lead and engage with teams is also something that I've learned in some ways through mistakes, but also in many ways through I think sheer luck of having people who you could trust. And then I've also been a firm advocate of this view that you hire super smart people and you give them the direction and leadership that they need, and then you leave them alone. Right. And so there's a quote that often is shared around, why hire smart people and then tell them what to do? So I think in some ways that's a great challenge for leaders of leaders to really, have that same disposition, assuming that you've built a team that you can trust and that, is able to execute in that way. So.
I love what you said, Torod. I mean, it's very spot on to my thoughts around what you did. It's being able to escalate your development and taking on larger teams. It's really about building that strong team, right? It's being able to delegate and to raise up your involvement. When we have smaller teams or individual contributors, it's all about the details, right? And now it's less about the details and moving up to a higher level and making sure you have enough detail, but not so much that you're not letting go and letting your teams drive. You mentioned confidence and trust. That's exactly what I do with my teams. It's about building those teams, having confidence in them, guiding and directing them, but letting go and making it at the right level. And I think one of the biggest things I say to my teams is, your success is my success and your failure is my failure. And I really focus on that with my teams. I'm here to help you. I am not going to babysit or guide you day to day, but you need to know at what level you need my involvement. And I'm here to make you successful and help you not fail. So take that. So just exactly what you said, Torod, and just building on it.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, just figure out how to change your leadership style where you really are empowering those other people to kind of lead the rest of the organization. And in some cases, if you were already doing that and now you've been elevated to now you're kind of leading more people, now you have to figure out how you're not going to do that anymore, right? How are you going to have that trust and that confidence that you guys talked about, and figure out how to bring yourself to that higher level, because we have to stay 10 steps ahead of everybody else, right? We always have to plow the road and to stay 10 steps ahead of everybody else. And you can't do that if you're, doing everyone else's job and figuring out, what they're doing every day. So having that empowerment and trusting in what they're doing is really key. And then understanding when it is appropriate to step in. So it doesn't always happen magically, right? And sometimes they do need that leadership and the guidance, even if they may or may not ask for it, and recognizing when that's time to do that. I'd say that, staying out of the weeds is hard for people to kind of make that transition. And so you just kind of have to recognize that that when not to do that, because no one wants someone doing their job for them. And then you don't get that following that you really need if you try to kind of step in there too much. So it's really kind of trying to stay that high level and letting people do their job.
So Hope, I want to follow up on something and ask you a different question. When you talk about, you said you have to let go,
Yeah.
right? So let's talk about, so what I'd love to hear your thoughts on and others is, so now you're going to go to a new team, lead a new team, and that means typically you're going to leave another team, right? You've probably spent some blood, sweat, and tears on and with. As a leader that's leaving a team, how do you handle the transition? And have there been times when it's been harder or easier?
So I think there's multiple phases on moving to a new role, right? I think the first is leaving the team that you're in. And whether that's going to another company or whether that's staying in the company and going to another job, you still have that transition. You still have to make sure that what you're leaving behind is going to be a good place. And so my first always advice to my teams and others is don't ever burn bridges when you're leaving a role, ever. You never know who you're going to work for. You never know who you're going to work with, and you never know where you're going to end up in another 5 or 10 years. And you always want to have that last impression when it comes to you leaving that role, having your mark on it and being professional, regardless of the reason as to why you're leaving that role. So I'd say that's kind of the first phase, is having a really good, strong, and sometimes you don't have anyone to transition it to. And so that means, if there's someone that you can have a point person to be able to do some of that, that's always the best, and document everything that you can and be able to allow that team that you're leaving behind in a really good place. So that way, that they're kind of taken care of and that they're going to be good in a good place. And the second is wherever you're going to, do your homework, right? Do your homework on whether it's a new team, whether it's a new company, understand what their goals are. And some of that you can find out before you even take on the role full time, and figure out what you're walking into when it comes to being it. Now, hopefully you've already done that with through interviewing or through other means to be able to kind of understand that. But figure out what that structure looks like and who does what, and come with your questions, when it comes to being ready to kind of take on a new team and a new challenge when it comes to why you're even there. Once you're in the role, then after a bit of time, when you start to get to know everyone and you start doing your own transition when it comes to transitioning into a role, doing what I call a new manager assimilation is huge. Right. So it really gives you that ability to get to know the team. It gives the team a safe way of being able to share feedback on what to stop doing, what to start doing, and what to change. And if you can take away those 3 things when it comes to you being fresh in that role, they feel like they've been heard, they feel like that they have an input on it, and it helps you develop what your strategy and your goals are going to be when it comes to being in that role. So those are the typical types of process that you kind of go through as you do transition out and transition into a couple of different roles.
And just to tag on to what Hope said, I would say leaving a team that you built and cultivated over time, it's always hard.
It's very hard.
But I would say, I always feel like when I'm leaving somewhere to go somewhere else, I feel like I'm leaving an accomplishment than leaving them behind. And I don't know about any of you, but when your work, we work a lot and we build relationships, work relationships, and out of that deems friendships. And I'm here at Eversource, and I brought a handful of people with me from past jobs I've worked, right? And to your point, Hope, like, you never burn a bridge, because you never know who you're working with or working for or around. And I think going back to the topic of, coaching people and mentoring people, I think it's really important to ensure that those friendships you've established, we send out our personal email and we keep those connections, because you want to bring some of them along with you if you can, right, on our journey of our career, right? So, it's hard, but I find it more of an accomplishment. And as far as the transition into a new role, I think the biggest thing is understanding expectations and making sure that you have a clear vision around those expectations and having regular meetings and cultivating those expectations as you grow into that new role. And the transition is, I think it's important, but every new leader leads differently and every new leader drives differently. So just because it was done that way before doesn't mean it will be done that way as the new leader takes over. So I give more guidance and direction than, I'll say, dictating how they should run their group, because they're an individual like we all are and is going to run a group differently. But understanding the expectation of delivery is key.
All right, thank you both very much. So I want to pivot a little bit here and talk about, now you're hired and you're working for a leader and you hit it off really well, right? And then the new leader, that leader leaves and a new leader comes on in. They might have a different style, as different priorities, be more direct or less direct. What do you do to prepare for a new leader? And how do you figure out what they value and what they don't? And I'll just kind of throw it out to anyone to kick this one off.
I think the first thing that I usually do is I look them up on LinkedIn, to be honest. You look them up, you learn as much as you can about that new leader. Where did they come from? What their experiences are? What communities do they belong to? What inspires them? What types of posts have they been out there? You actually will learn a lot when it comes to the type of person and the type of leader that they are and how active they are on LinkedIn, and really figuring out what your commonalities are, right? What do you have in common? What can you talk about when you kind of meet face to face, in addition to, all of the hard work that you're about to do, and figure out how you're going to build a relationship with that person and really kind of figure out what you're going to walk in there. And then observe on how they manage. I think you'll learn a lot by just kind of watching how they interact in meetings and what their expectations are, and then eventually really asking them what their expectations are and making sure that you can meet those expectations, and start really building that relationship and building that trust with a new leader. It's hard, right? Because change is hard in general. But now when you have someone new that's coming in and calling all the shots and potentially changing everything that you're doing because you were kind of going down a path A and now you're going down path B, it's really about just kind of flexing your leadership style and figuring out what you need to do differently to try to accommodate some of the new line of thinking that's coming in. And sometimes that can be a nice fresh perspective too, right? They could bring some really good change in there, and being the voice to say, here's some of the good changes that you think that you could make in order, and partnering with them and figuring out how you can do it together.
I'd say in addition to what Hope just shared, which I thought was great, I think for me, it's also been an opportunity to be aggressive about being helpful, right? So the one thing a new leader needs is, to feel like there are people on the team who are allies, advocates, even if it's not, again, not the person you might have selected or you had a friend who you thought might get that role. And so I think at the end of the day, kind of leaning into the emotional intelligence aspect of a transition and really trying to think through, how can I be helpful to this leader in their onboarding? And then listening, really, really listening. I think some of the things that I've seen leaders do really poorly in working with a new manager is when we are perhaps a bit too forthcoming about our point of view or our view of how things should be done or what's working and what's not. And so I think back to the emotional intelligence point, leadership has its privileges, right? And so a person in that role has to be given a certain degree of deference because they've been put there. And so I think us being able to practically take a step back and really just synthesize and understand the environment, but be a supporter is some of the early things that we can do to really, I think, help both of our cases, both the new leader and our own individual roles.
And Todd, I love what you said about listening, right? I think we always forget that point, right? But what I would add to that is cultivation over time, right? Remember, that person's new in their role. You're learning to work with them. And I think over time you get to know one another, and over time you understand how to work together more efficiently. It doesn't happen overnight. Again, especially if someone's coming in and as Hope said, kind of changing direction and realigning. It can be frustrating, and you're like, I've been working this way for 5 years, and now Ron comes in and changes everything, right? And you're like, okay, how do I adjust, right? But sitting back and listening and understanding perspective, I think is really important. And I think just in general, we don't have to agree with everything our new leader does, but we have to support them. And we have to understand why they're doing the things they do, but we don't have to agree. And sometimes I think people confuse that, right? They're like, oh, I have to be on board with everything a new leader's doing. No, you don't. No, you don't have to, but you do have to support them. And you have to listen and help create the successes they're trying to create, right? We are either part of the solution or part of the problem. And if we're really supporting our leadership and our organization, we have to listen and we have to drive to their points, whether we like them or not. And that's hard, especially if you've been kind of stuck in your role for a while and you've been doing it the same way for a lot of years, and somebody comes in and says, oh, we're going to change everything, right? But step back, listen, seek to understand, and understand that they're leading in a direction that they feel is value. And as you get to know them and you cultivate that relationship, I think you'll understand it more and it'll make more sense. And then you'll drive harder to help them be successful, because that's our job, is to help our leaders be successful.
Yeah, it's all about the blind trust, right? So, and that's kind of what I call it. It's blind trust. I don't know them very well. I have never worked with them before. And here they are coming in and start changing in my world. And you have to trust that the company and that individual had faith in this individual to be able to come in and make the necessary changes, or just to be able to make things better than it is today, that they're bringing in the outside experiences to be able to do that. So that's the blind trust. And then to your point, Sue, once you start to get to know them and figuring out, and then the light bulb starts to go off, because you're starting to connect the dots, because you're not really understanding the direction that they're taking it. Then you start to kind of like get on board and making sure that and you talk the talk, right? You talk the talk with the teams and get them on board as well, and have that blind trust that leader is going in the right direction, and that you support them. Because if they don't have your support, it's pushing a rope, right? It's hard, as a leader, to be able to do that if you don't have the support of your staff.
Outstanding. Thank you all. So Torod, I want to address this question to you to start off with, and then we can go from there. We talked as we were preparing for the session that you had an opportunity where you moved into your boss's role. Having done that myself, I find this is a particularly interesting transition, because you go from being peers to now you're someone's manager or leader. How did it go for you, and any advice, or what would you do differently?
Yeah, I think it was about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years into working for me. This was Bank of America, and my manager for those 2.5 years became my direct report. And so obviously the awkwardness aside, I will say, for a situation like that to be successful, it really depends on both. And I give her a ton of credit. She handled it really well, really professionally. But there was also a significant amount of onus on my part as well to handle it as a professional, and to be sensitized to how she might feel. Again, all the things that, again, these were never articulated to me, but again, back to taking a step back and putting yourself in someone else's shoes. I was conscious of wanting this to be a easier transition for her as well. And so I was super aware of being a considerate leader, and also respecting all that she had done and brought to the table professionally and otherwise. And I think that's half the battle in a situation like that. And I think obviously the personality is a big piece. But I think sometimes the challenge can be when we believe we need to show up in a certain way as a strong and assertive and opinionated leader. And back to that emotional intelligence challenges, it runs counter to what's best for the team to succeed. And so I think for me, that transition was made easier by, again, she was a great leader about it. But also, I think for me, I was super aware that this has got to work for the whole team in addition to her. And so I think that also helped that to be a much more pleasant situation than it could have been.
Yeah, it's a tough transition. You know, for me, one of the things that took me a little bit to learn is that everyone's frame of reference changed the day you were announced. You know, so when you would go to lunch with your colleagues at the time and your peers, and then all of a sudden you're their leader, that same lunchtime conversation happens through a different lens, and many times neither party understands that the lens has changed. So I thought that was another important aspect. You know, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, being in that, taking over your manager's role and moving up from a peer, I think one of the biggest things I learned from it was that I thought it would be easy, and it wasn't, right? And I thought, because I had formed a relationship with my peer group, that they would be more accepting than they were, right? And I didn't take time to listen. Moving into this manager's role, I want to say I acted like I knew it all, but you know, I think you feel like you can take control because you've been part of this organization, you can lead, but moving up creates animosity of others that didn't move up, and having empathy for that is important. And I think we forget about the human aspect of it, is that I'm sure when I moved up, there was 2 other people that wanted that role, or 3 other people that wanted that role that didn't get it. And we have to be empathetic to that. We're all human. We all want to advance our careers. And I think we need to step back and appreciate people's feelings at times, and we forget because we're just so in the everyday of getting our job done. So I think for me, don't assume, and make sure you have empathy, because either way, it's a job, but they feel like they should be in that role, and understanding that concept, because what if you didn't get it? And what if one of your peers got it? So I try to put myself now in other people's shoes to make sure that I can understand their feelings, because I think it's an important part of gaining trust in relationships, especially moving up the ladder.
Yeah, it's important. Like while I haven't had the situation of myself taking one of my boss's roles, I've been acting and other things, but it was never a permanent type of change. I would say that I have promoted somebody into that role, right? Where they went for it and they got it, and they were the best candidate. And before I offered them the role, I said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" Well, it was the right next step for that individual when it comes to their career, and it was a good match. And I would never set them up for failure. They need to know what they're going into when it comes to it being a hard situation. And in Torod's example, I think that was probably the best case that could happen with that, right? Knowing that there's cooperation on both sides, and sometimes it doesn't always go that way. And so you need to go in with your eyes open, and have that emotional intelligence that we keep talking about when it comes to making sure that you're understanding all those perspectives, and that you know that going in, and not be surprised about that. So I always give that advice to anyone to say, you know, get ready, because it may not be easy. And then I also give them here are 3 things that maybe you should do to kind of help with the transition, and knowing that your relationships with your team have now automatically changed. Rightfully so, to be honest, right? So. Yep.
Oh, I want to take us back a little. There's a question from Marissa Hughes. And Marissa says, Sue talked about the importance of supporting new leaders, even when you do not agree with their position. What does that practically look like? And do you have to hold your tongue when your team asks your opinion?
That's a good question. You know, I think we all hold our tongue, right? I mean, like, there are times where, you know, I have this analogy I use all the time, which is know your audience, right? And knowing your audience, whether it's your peers or people below you or people above you, we're all, I'll go back again, we're all individuals, right? And understanding their perspective is important. Again, it doesn't mean you have to agree to them, but you know, I challenge, I work for Ron, I challenge Ron, right? I have no hesitation of challenging Ron. It's a mutual respect though, right? It's not challenging in a disrespectful way. And there are times I'll say, you know, I don't agree with you, but I'm going to support you, right? And that's okay. Like, that's what makes us all individuals, right? And we're seeing things from different vantage points. And I always say to myself, I'm not him. I don't know what he's dealing with. I don't know, you know, if he has a different perspective from me. So I'm going to respect that. And I'm going to move on, right? So to me, it's about respect. You know, you don't have to agree. I mean, if we agreed with our husbands or our wives every day, we, you know, that'd be a miracle. I'd like to know how you do that. But it's about the respect you gain from that, whether it's in a personal relationship or a work relationship. They come from different areas and different vantage points, and they're leading the group in different ways. But that doesn't mean I don't voice my concerns and ensure that I have a voice at the table. I'm an executive. I want a voice, right? And I think that's that mutual respect, but you don't have to agree with it, right? So I'm not quiet, as Ron would probably attest. I'm pretty loud in my opinions, but then I will back down and listen because he is my leader, right?
I think it's, you know, it's a little bit of the back to, I hate to overuse a term, but again, Hope mentioned it as well, that emotional intelligence as well, right? And so, because I've had leaders who made it clear that their view was that their opinions were the right decisions and everyone needed to follow. And I've also had leaders, and this is where I've tried to emulate, who verbalized, listen, there is constructive dissent as a positive thing, and we're in this together, and we all need to be open and confident and able to share when we disagree. And so ideally, I think that's the environment we all want to be in. But again, having been in some where that was not the disposition of the leader, I think to Sue's point, it requires a bit of being able to synthesize your environment and figure out the right way to do it, right? And so I've also been someone who believes my voice matters. The politics of figuring out how to have your voice matter. If you're in an environment where you're with a manager or leader who may not welcome that, is a bit of the trick shot there.
Yeah. I'll add two things. One is we have to assume when we're reporting to someone that they're going to know more than we do, and they can't share everything all the time as well, right? So there may be reasons why a leader's making decisions or going in a direction that you don't agree with, or that you don't understand, or you don't, but they may know more than you do when it comes to what's been shared with them, and what they may not necessarily be able to kind of tell holistically. So have the faith and a little bit of the respect piece of it, that there may be something else that's going on there that you don't necessarily always have the full picture of, and that you may not get that full picture until a later time. And then the other is really around, sometimes folks do come around, and we have to figure out as leaders, take the responsibility of bringing people with us. And so there's extra effort on being able to do that. And there's a whole methodology of change management and other things when it comes to how do you bring your organizations along with you. And as leaders, we do have that responsibility. Sometimes we're not always successful, but gaining that respect and that trust is a part of that, right? And you're not necessarily always going to get everyone 100% on board all the time, but we do have to try when it comes to being able to influence and making sure that everybody understands the why, and eventually that they'll be able to see the way that we're going.
Yeah, and Hope, just to tag onto that a little bit, I would just add a third thing, which is I think we all forget that we all come into our work every day with the best intentions, right? And I am sure that decisions are made not to be, disrespectful to somebody, but it's the best intentions, and not having that full view that our leaders have. We should always sit back and say he's got the best intentions of our organization in mind, and not think that there's some ulterior motive to decisions that are being made or something political, because I don't think that's the case. I think we all drive to make decisions and directions with the best intentions to help our organizations. And I think sometimes we forget about that, like there's some ulterior motive to something, but there's not, right? Like we just want to make the best decisions for our company with the facts we have in front of us.
And I'll just add one point before pivoting to another question, and that is as coming on in as a new leader, I think it's important that you explain what's going into one of your decisions a little bit more than maybe with a team that you've been with for a couple of years, because they don't know you, they don't know your thought process. And I've always found that it's very beneficial if I could understand my leader's thought process, like, I didn't think of that, or I didn't realize this, that it helps. So as a leader coming on into a new organization, my joke is like Typhoon Ron came on in and they don't know what to do with you, right? And because you're coming from a completely different angle, I think it's beneficial to as much as possible kind of take them through your decision-making process with what you're weighing. All right, so we're going to pivot. We've got another question. This comes from Susan Torney. She's been patiently waiting. She submitted this early on in our session. I think it's an outstanding question, and I'll put it to whoever wants to answer it. For those who took more senior roles in an industry where you were not in previously, how did you convince the hiring manager you were ready for the pivot to a new space while still being a leader?
I can answer that a little bit. Where in GE, we obviously have multiple industries. You can hop from one business to the other, but not having some of that industry knowledge, especially going from a non-regulated company to a regulated company, right? That's a huge shift. Priorities are different. You're wondering why we're wasting our time doing some of the things that we're doing, right? And so it really is a dramatic change. I was fortunate enough, though, that I had the technical acumen that was needed in the role. So I went from one, IT operations role, being really good at it and, knocking it out of the park, to another, but just in a different industry. So the roles were very similar in nature. And that's one of the nice things about technology is technology, no matter where you go. You might use it a little differently, but we all have the same problems in most cases when it comes to, regardless of what industry that you're in. And your experiences, you can bring that with you when it comes to, kind of living through the fires of how technology can go good, bad, and ugly, and bringing that with you when it comes to executing a good strategy. So I say having some commonality in my roles, going from one industry to the other, helped. And then you can demonstrate that by, talking about what your experiences were and how you were able to kind of navigate through that role. So that's just something that I was able to get through.
And to tag on to Hope, I've switched from manufacturing to energy, which is EverSource, right? And I 100% agree. Technology is technology, no matter where you go. I think moving from industry to industry is less difficult, especially in the IT world. I had a recent event about a year ago where I went to Ron and said, I need a challenge. You got to give me something more. I've proven myself over here. And I say that because in order for you to advance your career, you have to prove yourself within an area that you're working. You have to exceed at what you're doing. And then if you're not getting those opportunities, you need to reach out. It's up to you to reach out to say, hey, I've showed you what I could do over here. Give me something else. And I have worked on the infrastructure side my whole career, except for probably a 5-year stint where I was on the application side. And Ron gave me an opportunity to take over 2 application areas last February that were having some challenges. And I said, just give me a couple of months and I can show you what I can do. And he gave me that opportunity, but it was me going to him to say, give me that opportunity. Let me show you what I can do. And I think that's the biggest thing we all forget, whether we are our own destiny. We wake up every morning and we decide and we make the decisions. Nobody's making those decisions to brush our teeth or comb our hair, right? And I think the same is with our career. We have to push, and Ron will attest, I push. I'm like, give me something, right? I'll show you, right? So you have to push. You're your own advocate, and you have to be an advocate, and don't be afraid to push the boundaries. But before you can do that, you have to have made success in the areas of which you are, and you, in order to grow, to be a stronger leader and have more of a scope. Because a lot of leaders will not give you opportunities if you haven't done an outstanding job in the current role that you're in.
All right. Next, I'm going to invite Elizabeth to come on into the discussion. Elizabeth, you've been collecting some questions ahead of time. Would you like to throw some of them to our panel?
Sure. Hopefully everyone can hear me, and thank you so much for your comments and the panel so far. So one that came in is really around mentors and mentors in your career progression. Have you sought out mentors separately or individually, and or have they been assigned to you by your organization?
I don't, do you want to take that, Torod, or?
You can go for it.
Yeah, so my entire career, I have seeked out mentors. I think there's a lot to learn from getting different vantage points, and it's not a mentor necessarily in my area. Sometimes it's outside my area. I also focus on mentoring. I mentor right now 6 people, some who came to me and some who I reached out to. I think it's a key part of our job as leaders to both be mentored and to mentor, and you learn a ton from it. And whether we're mentoring kids, because I was, if you read my bio, I was a Girl Scout leader for 16 years, and you learn a ton from that too. I was a foster parent and still a foster parent, and you learn a lot from that too, right? And whether it's a Girl Scout leader or a foster parent or a mentor at a work situation, all of those are opportunities for you to grow and learn and develop. And I think if you're not seeking it, you're losing a great opportunity to grow as a leader or just grow as a human. Like it's important. And because all of our experiences are individual, and what we have to teach and what we can be taught is always different.
Yeah, that's great. Any practical advice on how you ask someone to be your mentor?
I'll say one thing, as the recipient of a lot of incoming mentor calls, I think what I've always been impressed by is people who will reach out to me with a very specific, appreciating my schedule and my life and my career. And, they're very focused on knowing, hey, I'd love if we could once a quarter have a cup of coffee, or I'd love if, once a month, I can email you a question. And so I think that's super helpful, obviously, depending on the level and layer, because we're all busy doing, 4 or 5 jobs. And if you've got a family, all those things. And so I think in this environment, putting in a little extra thought into beyond me wanting that person to be my mentor, let me make this easy for them before I even make the ask, anticipating what they're dealing with in their professional and personal lives. So I think that's one piece of advice I'd give everyone.
That's great. And Gerard, I'm just going to chime in there. When I meet with somebody who asks me to mentor them, the first thing I say to them is, this is your meeting, not mine. What do you need from me? And I'll help you, right? I don't know them. I haven't been personal to them. So I'm asking them to bring to the table how I can help them. And in some situations, when they brought something to the table, I'm like, I'm probably not the best to handle that situation, but here's a couple people you can go to ask those questions, right? So to me, the best advice I can give anybody who's seeking mentorship is go with a defined list of things you're expecting or you need out of that mentorship, and don't expect your mentor to give you the feedback, because they don't know what you need or what your asks are.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think those sessions will be as valuable as they put into it, right? So if they come prepared and they, or even if they just want it to be, a casual cup of coffee and just be able to catch up, usually there's still something in there that they want to be able to try to still get some advice on, or be able to kind of talk through something. If they come prepared with that, then they're going to get out of it exactly what they put into it. So, and I see the difference between some people that I mentor, right? The folks that are that prepared have done terrific, when it comes to being able to just continue to excel. And just simply asking for a mentor means you're really interested, right? Means you're interested. And I rarely have ever told anyone that I couldn't mentor them. I will always try to make it the time, and I'm honored when someone asks me, because that means they feel as though that my voice matters to them and that they value my opinion. And so I reflect that back to them anytime that someone asks me to help them out.
That's great. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more question. And just as a warning, this is a hard one. You're all incredibly accomplished, successful professionals. Any hints, tips, or personal experiences you'd like to share around failures or career setbacks?
Go ahead, Torod.
I was going to say, and I think someone mentioned this earlier, it's all through your perspective. I think every failure is an opportunity to learn. And so I think if you go at it with that, it becomes something that can benefit your career as opposed to something that's defeated you or defined your career.
Yeah, that's spot on. I'd say if you can always find a way to learn from it, and even hopefully you're still in the situation where you can recognize that it didn't go the way you thought it was going to, right? And just having that recognition is going to be huge to be able to figure out how you turn it around, and being able to have the opportunity to do that is huge. Sometimes that doesn't always happen, right? And the opportunity's already come and gone between you realize, okay, you didn't have that opportunity, but the next time you're going to be that much smarter. And don't be afraid to fail, right? I know that's really hard to hear and really hard to listen and do, but those are your biggest opportunities to learn something that you're never going to forget ever again. Unfortunately, you learn the hard way, and most leadership will be patient enough with that, right? That you're going to take the risk and you're going to go for it. And if you're not successful, then don't give up, just learn from it and keep going.
Yeah, as a director of infrastructure, systems go down all the time, right? How we react to those failures and our response to those failures, to me, are the most important. And I know I'm relating it to a system, but a person's the same way, right? Like how you respond to that failure and what you learn and grow from it is the best outcome you can have. We're all going to fail. We all failed, right? It doesn't matter, but it's what you take from that failure and how you learn and grow. And I think the other thing is you got to make sure it doesn't happen again, right? Like, and I'm not saying it's not going to happen again, but if you truly learned and took the time to analyze what happened, right, then it's all about making sure it doesn't happen again. And that's something I reinforce with my team. I'm okay with you failing, but if it happens 2 or 3 times, then there's something we're not learning from that failure. And we really need to take a step back and say, what didn't we capture? And again, whether it's a personal failure or infrastructure failure, I find them the same way. It's really stepping back and understanding what happened, how you can modify. And, we talked about mentors. Go to your mentor and say, hey, this happened. Maybe you don't have the answers, but I think Torod said at the beginning, we don't have to be the smartest people in the room, but we have to know who to go to and be okay with going to, even when you fail, right? Like we're all afraid and we hide in a corner. This is when we should stand up strong and say, I need a support system to help me understand what happened and how I grow as an individual.
Fantastic advice. Thank you. I'm going to wrap us up. This hour has flown by. If you enjoyed the seminar, please consider following us in future events by subscribing to our newsletter or following us on social media, including Instagram, which is at MWM-CT, on Facebook at Million Women Mentors CT Chapter, or on LinkedIn, Million Women Mentors CT Chapter. Please also look out for information on an upcoming panel event we're planning on computer science careers. And finally, as today marks the last day of National Mentoring Month, please take a moment in your day today to reach out and thank your mentors for their time and advice. So thank you all, Ron, Sue, Hope, Gerard, Carolyn, fantastic panel, and I really, really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you.